Alright, it's Tuesday again on the East Coast of the United States. It's week 6 of the Menzoberranzan update. Technically week 6 and 1 day, because we do these on Tuesday rollouts. Alright, let's see what's new in the neighborhood. Actually, I think from last week, if I recall, this is a non-milestone week, because they double extended the duration, yeah. So it'll be identical to last week, especially with the 4th milestone unlock, which I don't think is repeatable, yeah, if I recall. It doesn't add to anything. So it's more like week 4. So week 4 through this week is going to be identical. Next week we might see something at this 600 currency unlock, but we're not going to do it today because, again, weekly haul capped, probably the most disagreeable and illogical form of progression, anti-locking currency at a milestone. But hey, that just means you wait for next week. Alright, let's see if we notice anything different. As always, this is part of recording for the Legacy, the daily driver that I play pretty much once a day. Yeah, and I have a really long legacy with this game. Over 7 years of legacy with this game. Okay, so let's start. Let's put a clock on this. 6:25. Local time is always displayed at the top right. So let's see. So we have carryovers from every week because I like to keep my weekly hauls attached and not overflowing. So let's see, 1, 2, that's 2 times 6, 12. And then we had the 1 weekly that we're holding over, just to see if it does this. So it does do this, which is really annoying, but that's okay. And then we had the cleaning streets that offset our time last time, which now we have to grab again because it becomes available. You can't double lap where you save. The design is so that it only goes on cooldown when it's turned in, as opposed to an allotted amount of repeats, as in if you finished it last time you turn it in, it should come up again because it's the new week or the I personally like allocations better than, in my opinion, it provides more flexibilities than doing hard resets, or soft resets every week. So for example, it's not beyond Cryptic to not do this. So adventure packs like battle passes are cumulative. They're 3 days stocked credit. And generally speaking, in live service games, stock credits are far more consistent at retaining and increasing overall playtime for a player than preying on FOMO these days. If you prey on FOMO, generally speaking, it used to work. I would say 2 or 3 years ago, maybe like live service games were pretty bopping when you capitalize on FOMO, where, hey, it's a limited event, you gotta be at the limited event 90% of the time and you can't do anything else. Generally speaking, enough FOMO occurs to a point where the player decides, if I can't get all of it, I'm not going to bother playing the game anymore. Like, because I would play a game that fits my schedule. So when it comes to like weeklies and stuff, I would probably use a stock approach, in my opinion, to even campaigns and stuff. Like allocated stocks, like 2 or 3 weeks. Because weekly hauls, again, this is a unpopular design. The weekly haul is capped to 100, and Legacy has this uncapped. It's usually like currency goes up with progression, but now it doesn't. So missing a week, capping it at 100 relative to the 10 weeks that are required to complete it, people leave even for weeks from games. Like this is, I mean, overall it's not as strict because of this is a really terrible silver. I don't think this is a great silver lining, but the 10 weeks is only reasonable because their roadmap deals out content based on their resources that they have, that this would be a time frame that gives plenty of time to stretch across the lack of content period. But for other games, they roll pretty fast, so 1 week, even having a double week grace period is great. The reason why I say 2 week grace period minimum that carry over is I play another live service game that does that, and it fits far more expecting someone to find time to fill most of the requirements half the time. This is reaching. This is still have a little tweaking to do, in my opinion. Oh, that hit a little hard there. All right. Okay. We took about a minute. Let's just say a minute to clear that stuff. So how do we juggle this? Well, we don't get the 1 weekly because we already turned it in. So we just do midnight. Midnight first. It's just observations. I would be curious what they decide to do in the next block regarding it. Historically, it's largely unchanged. Rarely is there a dramatic change in structure. The developer as a group in general are creatures of habit, are more refractory to changes. Although the gaming industry doesn't wait for changes. Not as long as the time frame that it takes them to implement different quality of life changes. Alright. Let's see if I can run across. Oh no, I can't. Man. Close, but no cigar. This is the fastest route. We can't do the weekly, the starless cliff thing. Otherwise, we would only need to stack our dailies. We'd be complete right away. Actually, we would have to turn in 1 daily because it ends at 98 currency as opposed to 100 with a currency bonus that newer players would pay for, which is another disagreeable thing that is done personally just because of a lack of attention to detail as opposed to really design in general. Just it's a lack of attention to detail. When you're paying for services, I don't think that's easily excusable. Services that you're asking to pay for convenience doesn't match up to the convenience it promises. All right, so 80. So that would mean we have to hide these first, because we don't do those intentionally. We don't need trackers for those. All right. What do we have? Supply caches, and so we rotate on around the outside. They're the boxes, but they line up. So these two are pretty good. Line up. That's weird. I was kind of expecting one there. Oh, there's the assassin. They're just there to dismount you. Although, last week, we noticed that they do drop rings. But regrettably, anything that's accessible from the solo side don't necessarily promote progression. They're what people would probably call the excess loot, a loot to rotate until you potentially equip an alternate. Live service games are getting closer to the point where, since keeping the content rotating constantly, having a structure that makes it conditions your audience to expect power creep, but incremental power creep that can be invested forward, is probably, in my opinion, a more appropriate model, as opposed to making the power creep hard to achieve, like time-wise, and then superseding it. The harder or more resistant that it takes to achieve something in a live service game, the proportionally longer the player is going to expect that object to be legacied in. So one of the biggest talking points in this game is the idea that there's a mixed message of, hey, you need to do all these things sentimentally and mentally and physically to achieve these things and be rewarded to it, but then immediately when the live service game update rolls around again, the fear is that all that work is superseded by power creep. So you have two models that are in conflict with each other, that are not compatible at the moment, and there will be some growing pains to find what balance they really want and what balance the remaining community stands for, like, would tolerate. Right now, it's trying to straddle two things that are completely incompatible, in my opinion. Unfortunately, you can't really have both. The idea that you can ascribe reward to, like, proficiency, or trying to cater to people who want legacy, long legacy, and be exceptional, privileged, with like network and connections and established, and then making the new players the people who gets roped into it by the legacy players, not intentionally or anything, just by mere exposure, and it ends up favoring those privileged players while upsetting them over and over again because it's a live service game format now, and at the same time upsetting all the casual players because they design things that are meant to make it accessible but not sustainable, because you get blocked out by the legacy players, because you require legacy to get into the legacy group, and that's a tough thing, man. A great example is every time one of the old hat legacy parts, the most exciting part about playing Western MMORPGs are dungeons, raids. Those things are non-existent. Like, they may as well be absent because it's only accessible or it's the privileged. And rarely has there been a design in the last 3 or 4 years that enable legacy or privilege to decrease and the privilege barrier to decrease. So generally speaking, you have people who play with the accessibility functions, find out that legacy is fake, in my opinion, or it's gilded, and they leave. And it continuously leaves behind the pool of legacy players that are already have the founders effect. So since they're founders, they want their game to grow in order to feed the bottom line, which are new players who feed the bottom line. But at the same time, the design to get new players only angers the legacy group because it supersedes and phases out their quote-unquote hard work. But here's one of the biggest, like, counterintuitive, I guess it might be counterintuitive, statement about legacy. When you get legacy and privilege, your perception of what is hard or trying hard is far from someone who is attempting to break into a legacy group. So it's very human. It's a very human quality to feel that way when you become detached so far from being new. So the longer this keeps going, the less likely that the legacy group would be... Wait, oh yeah. The less likely that the remaining group would be tolerant to accepting new group, and they would become less and less tolerant to change. So I don't know which is it. I do play another live service game that does straddle this, but they did it by just straight up saying this is how the game is going to be, and we can do it naturally really well and right from the start. So players that was expecting something else didn't start inappropriately starting gathering in the game, and then the design missed their expectations. How they did it was performance and like statistics and stuff, things to demonstrate your proficiency in the game, so catering to the hardcore and legacy, was they used statistics, like different variances and stuff of bosses they have, to demonstrate their prowess. So the mechanical side, but the mechanical side is for clout, specifically for clout. It's rarely rewarded. That supersedes people who don't want to do it. So what happens is you have a very mutual community where, hey, yeah, I'm not going to go out of my way to do all these performance things, but hey, I can have the entire game accessible to me still, and I'm still part of the group that is very experienced. That type of system still has their friction, which is the whole idea that when you have elitism that grows incredibly big, sometimes you still encounter the idea that some people think that they overvalue their own personal contributions, which that will likely happen in both systems. But the system in this other game that I play, it mitigates that compared to this system, which incredibly enables elitism over, like, it rewards elitism, so it reinforces that, and it reinforces the overvalue of of a specific group over another group, which has its ups and downs too. Like, on the one hand, you certainly guarantee that your loyalties are there, but here's the thing about, like, passionate loyalty and hardcoreness. Those gatekeepers are just as critical of your product than someone who is trying to like your product from a outgroup perspective. So it's a tough challenge. And then when you're straddling both, you're gonna end up upsetting both. That's kind of the narrative in this game, largely, from a design standpoint, in my opinion. It generally, negativity and, like, negative receptions are revolving around legacy. All right. Did I turn too many in? I turned in 24, right? Because if I turn in through 18, you only need +1. Yeah, so we needed to turn in all 24. And then we'll stack the daily again. That was 10 minutes, not too bad. We're gonna have to do both the dailies next week. We go back. But the routine today is we do the dailies twice in a row. Alright, loyalists, and is it teardown? So we go for propaganda. I look for propaganda on the outside. And then just kill any target. One thing to note, though, it's not like there's any foul play being made on from the publisher or the developer, in my opinion. It kind of lines up. Most of the design choices reinforce what I'm observing. So being aware of that, or not being misconstrued or misled, I mean, then the onus is on the person to navigate that decision. So it doesn't say like I don't at least see continue like adverbs or any like clear indications like, hey, this game is so and so, and it clearly is not. Like there aren't any red flags when it comes to being misled, but understanding the pros and cons of the design and things that you may or may not choose to do is helpful, because you want to be understanding to your sub and other people's products. Like, do their intent and their design meet what they want to achieve? And I think there really isn't any gigantic indicator that would suggest that they want to tear down like the legacy in this game. Western MMOs tend to really be more reliant, like Western philosophy publications and studios are way more reliant on legacy and loyalty than volume. So volume tends to not, and it's a really long digression actually. It kind of flows with the bigger culture in mind, like Western culture in general, like how businesses are run, how what supersedes. Is it about consistent quality towards the stranger or the uninitiated versus retaining the big consistent revenue sources and whatnot? The approach kind of bleeds into what would naturally happen in a Western studio like Cryptic, as opposed to the other game I play, which is an Eastern publisher and developer. Their approach is great to be used for contrast, hence I kind of still play both of them daily. So there's room in my mind and maybe perhaps my heart for both. It's a great way to draw compare and contrast different approaches without feeling biased towards one or the other. Keeps you grounded. Kind of like sampling more than one service provider, or sampling more than one live streaming platform, or more than one social media. It keeps the ideas flowing. What works, what doesn't work for you, what works and doesn't work for them, and making, constantly being challenged to not become complacent. Meanwhile, the people that are doing these things most certainly may potentially benefit from hearing those who have the privilege to sample other things. So like when you're a career seeker, you have to end up specializing in stuff, so you focus on a product and whatnot, and that inevitably leads to groupthink, sentimentalism, legacy from sentimentalism from legacy, time restrictions, right? And then personal biases, right? Or more personal biases. I named a few, but generally speaking, that will happen because it's part of the human condition, and time doesn't allow for that. Hence why, you go to other sources. You survey the player base, you survey someone who has the privilege of being promiscuous as opposed to being loyal. So if truly the agenda is to switch the direction, perhaps the leadership is not satisfied with the intent, the mission statement, the philosophy of where the game is going, seeking opinions from a privileged group that is loyal is probably counterintuitive and likely not productive. So while as they continue, the developers continue to show that they seek experience, opinions, constructive criticism, and representation from experienced players, loyal players, it is hopefully it's an accurate indication that the publisher is happy where the game's loyalty groups are now, like, I don't know, however, whatever the bottom line is, as well as the developers are still insistent that they prefer to pacify and satisfy loyalty over new blood, right? So that's just a personal choice. It's very difficult to do both. And it's very clear because on the almost on an entirely opposite end of the spectrum, I play PSO2 NGS every single day too, and their attitude and the way they present themselves is entirely different. It's really strong on numbers. So it's about being accessible. Accessibility is their primary goal. So their primary goal is to continue to instead of reaching like a steady state growth or something like that, they're looking to continuously cater to increasing its discoverability over advanced designs. So when it's rotating out new content, it's every 2 weeks actually. Well, something is updated every 2 weeks, and it's constantly rotating what some new players might find not as great on here. Like if you take a Neverwinter player and go to PSO2, every 2 weeks they're going to be like, it's the same thing. We do the same thing again and the same thing. But there's a difference in philosophy between the two. Iterating and constantly refining on something is a hallmark of Eastern design a lot of times. You slowly inch up and show over years of refinement that where you started and where you end was a consistent uptake. But in Western design, it's often more of a, what's the next big challenge? What's the next big thing? And unfortunately, because of that type of philosophy, there are going to be hit and misses along the way, because eventually you're going to misstep, because topping yourself over and over again, it's not great. The downside is live service games are live service games. They're lifestyle things. So having a model that needs to top yourself every time is not a sustainable life service model. Perhaps I can be entirely mistaken, and one day somehow Neverwinter becomes a testament to being consistent enough with that type of philosophy design. But I don't think that is. It's very illogical and counterintuitive. So, or it's a solution that it's a task I wouldn't take up. I wouldn't know how to navigate it. Or very low success rates, I suppose. But where there's a will, I suppose there's a chance. The biggest dissonance in trying to grow the game, if they're trying to grow the game, I'm not entirely sure if that's the case, where like they want to grow by numbers as opposed to grow by revenue, or grow by steady like loyalty or something, trying to focus on retention, like getting some growth but with a focus on retention, as opposed to specifically just going for shotgun effect and constantly go for growth. it still doesn't seem that way, because all the constructive criticism or whatever interaction stuff, it's heavily favor legacy. So any established players tend to be the focus of pacifying. So even their forum system, their websites, their outreach, it's generally only accessible or largely accessible and have proper feedback, or like visible feedback from individuals who are already established. There's very little indicator to show any concern or compassion for newer players. Keeping newer players largely in the dark is kind of works to their benefit in terms of the business model. So you rope them in, make the beginning accessible enough so that they play for a specific duration of time. Make the like a wet your toes approach, and then they stop playing. But by the point when they realize their investment is sufficient, it's the small tick, like the consistent small tick investment of live service games. In contrast to like larger Asian, like Eastern titles, like a great example would be an investment in entire universe. So for example, playing one game legacies you into another game, which then both those legacy games focus on incremental and persistent catering to retaining, but as well keeping a large volume. And that large volume is what perpetuates the game's success. A great example would be Genshin Impact, which has the Hoyoverse, which I guess Star Rail's out next month. In less than a month and a half, Zenless, which is another seemingly somewhat live service game, because I was looking at their business model, they're all connected. And it's about volume as opposed to quality. The downside is this is a double whammy, in my opinion, for Cryptic right now, is that you have a model that's predicated on quality, but it doesn't ever indicate that you have the resources to maintain that quality. So in order to consolidate, you turn the expectations to more of a live service game, yet you continue to build, like the group continues to build for quality, like the individuals gear towards a group that continues to expect quality over consistent quantity. Live service games generally favor consistent quantity, regular updates, regular incremental updates, not we're gonna knock it out of the park, hype up the next module that takes 3 to 4 months to wait for. That's more like a buy-in game, which if you're hitting for quality, expecting a $10 buy-in for a $3 to $4 module, that's great. It's reasonable. If you have the resources to maintain that quality, you don't, in my opinion. Like, it hasn't been demonstrated yet. If I had to poll the vast majority of the loyal groups of people who will still play the game when quality slumps, which includes myself, I think it's fair and reasonable to say it would include myself, where we would continue to play the game and wait for the quality. This instead, it turns into like a half measure where you still pay the upfront, the expectation of the upfront $5 to $10 value system of a module, but that module does not meet the quality of the group that stays with the developer. So instead of satisfying the most consistent group that is available in this game, they fail to do that, and their greatest asset are their greatest critics. Critics. That's weird. It's really weird. Hard to know where they're going from here. It's straddling two things. Like the battle pass, without doing designs that cater to grabbing a bigger audience. Battle passes are a money sink. It's a detraction from the game. So like, and battle passes are moot to the established player. Your biggest group is established players, in my opinion, and you're the most consistent players. And those services are meant to provide an avenue for newer players, but those neither are interested, because your game makes an end game that excludes anyone who would invest, or generally would invest out of trust, for regular incremental updates that power creep. So like you get stronger every time, but instead the wall just keeps going up and up, and they don't stay. So I wouldn't be surprised if the vast majority of the battle pass sales are just legacy sales as opposed to new player sales. On the flip side, games that have persistent quantity make battle passes revolve around that. So they want more quantity. The battle passes have things that allow you to manage that constant quantity, and all the battle passes continue to feed forward an investment, which is what they do, to be fair. Like these things, many of these things are an investment for. So the battle pass does have an investment for model, just none of the game design. I would say 80 to 90% of the game design doesn't support that type of sustainability. The players don't stick around that long. But if it was the intent of the designer, I guess these guys are going after disgruntled guys. I kind of need disgruntled guys. If they are intending to just recruit 1 or 2 loyalists, then that's fair enough. It meets the criteria. So like for every 100 new player, perhaps to meet the bottom line is to gain 1 additional privileged loyalist for every 100. That's fair enough. Seems, I would say there's a chance. 1 in 100 is the retention rate for every new person, like an uninitiated person. I would say 1% after 3 months, because the lull period is 3 to 4 months. Weekly hauls and that type of thing, having it gated like that doesn't help retention. Most things are not gated in that way in live service games. They're completed within the week. They're completed each week. or they are completed every 2 weeks. The longer the gated, the less likely the live service player will stay around. The moment you have them vacate for like 3 or 4 weeks, they're not coming back, generally speaking. There will be others, because it's live service games thrive on mere exposure. The more regularly integrated the activity is to the typical lifestyle, the more likely they'll continue playing. So when you give tasks for like live service games, the philosophy is, hey, log in for 5 minutes, do this, and eventually we'll make a big event at some point. But hey, while you wait on that, we'll give you something to do for 5 to 10 minutes every single day, as opposed to you can do all this and then you don't do anything for a week. There's a higher chance that someone will return and continue playing if they're consistently playing distributed over a smaller period of time across multiple days, like more evenly distributed, than someone who does one behavior to establish consistency. So as part of live service, a lifestyle, if you spread 15 minutes of game time for 5 minutes each, or let's just keep it at 7, for example, set like 70 minutes of game time for 10 minutes each. So each day you play 10 minutes. The likelihood of that player, both psychologically unaware or aware, will likely do that more consistently over time and develop a habit of playing the live service game than someone who does what I'm doing with the system you have developed. But I'm a legacy group, so I'll come because I have legacy already, as opposed to a new player who sees a game, they do it for 30 minutes a day, forget about it for 6 days, and realize, well, if I can only play this game 30 minutes a day, 30 minutes a week, and they're deliberately extending the life of this game by making me wait to play it after 7 days, I can't play it when I want to play it and feel like I have made an investment forward. That's what I mean by that. You can argue as a legacy player, you can do this and that and then save up for next time and whatnot. It's like there is some systems like that in place still that's legacy, like the rough AD is an example of the jump in, do a random queue, get 100 AD. But the main showcases are these activities, items and stuff, and all of these designs only favor legacy. It does not favor encouraging someone to establish a new habit. It constantly reinforces like, hey, sorry, you have to wait. And one might be thinking, well, it's the same. You can choose when you want to do it. You could separate it on yourself, like, but you're trying to convince a new person to do it. It might sound a little bit predatory, but it can be predatory. But the idea is the design is not encouraging that either. So you're expecting the 1 out of 100, I would say, generously, 1 out of 100 to establish that behavior themselves. And then they stay. That's where those players stay. However, now they're facing another obstacle. Those that stay expect the longer period they wait to equate to a proportional increase in the quality of the wait. And that's the dialogue every single time. When a new module comes out, you sit in PE for a little bit and you just have a bunch of people who disproportionately disagree over agreeing that the module meets their expectations, because it doesn't, generally speaking. I think this game, based on its current like type of stuff that they're doing, ripping the band-aid and going for a more generous approach on consistency to grow the audience and phasing out loyalty may be a heavy financial risk, but at the same time would probably align with all the design and resources that they have right now. Just a personal take, but obviously it's difficult to know what their thoughts are, since the leadership rarely ever reaches out to the uninitiated. There are very lack of any attempts or initiative to spread, let's say, promises or attractions to people who aren't initiated. It's often just catered to people who are, which includes myself. But even for myself, I find it hard to know what it is, because you have to be pretty privileged to be in the know. Having special privilege and special access, special advantages financially or in-game, like virtually financially, is a privilege of being loyal to this game. The privilege gets more privileges. The newer people are the bottom line to feed the privilege. That's the model, which is very representative of Western philosophy and business models. Not a bad thing or a good thing, it's just a system that persists, in my opinion. It's an alternative system. Obviously, one always has the opportunity of, if you don't like it, hopefully you're aware that you don't like it, and you don't get like baited into a system that you don't like. I play this game because I don't mind it. It favors me, technically. So there's that. In PSO2 NGS, the idea is you just hop in. It doesn't. You have so many strangers who are doing the same thing. Even in the dead hours, there are just so many people doing the same thing. And the threshold is so low, you just get her done anyways. That's the volume perspective. There's just lots of people playing around the clock all the time. So you don't have to... It's kind of ironic a little bit that the players here, the most numerous complaints during a lull period is that there aren't anybody to fill queues to get the stuff, because you still require other players to do so. So during specific hours, specifically the United States hours, evening hours, there's I would say an exponential tank in being able to accomplish specific tasks in the US evenings. And it is biasly attacked for saying that, because a large majority of people are in the European regions that play this game, that would suggest that there isn't a problem. It's a skill issue. Like, there's something you can't replace when it comes to skill issue. If there isn't a person to have skills, you can't get it done anyways. If you design a game that specifically, navigates that, then that's a different story. And yes, so NGS does do that. You don't actually need everyone, but because of its accessibility, that it's possible. So it's ironic, but the design required to mitigate the lack of players, consistent players, is a design that goes against the philosophy of privilege, of elitism. But Western MMOs, when they design their mechanics and stuff, favors elitism, favors skill issues and whatnot. That's kind of the reward. So if you're in that mentality, you're playing a game, but to support the game with enough players, if you're struggling with that, it's to do the opposite. Usually, is to forget about the hardcore, reinvest in casual play, grow your base again, and hope that you can retain that group while going back to a hardcore state. That's a tough ask, in my opinion. Very tough ask. Navigating that is very difficult. Yeah, like most of the challenges in PSO2 has both a solo component and a party component. Even down to challenges and whatnot that reward things, there's a solo component and a party component. And even then, the party component is scalar. So more people, higher scales. Less people, less scales. Less scaling. It's designed to keep people welcome to play at any time during the day, anytime during their schedule. Oh, I was supposed to do supply run to civilians, actually. I wasn't paying attention. This game doesn't have scaling. It's rarely ever scaling. It's a 0 or a 1. Like for this, like just sitting here, standing that's a 0 right there. The chances that will feel rewarding what they're doing right now is very low. And I do my dailies because I just do my dailies the most efficient way I can, since I am I'm more of a live service guy. I still play this game because of live service approach. This is more agreeable to my schedule. Like, have I done the master trials? Absolutely not. And I don't plan on it either. You put out content that constantly reinforces a live service game, but then you throw in a curveball. You throw in a curveball by introducing loyal based set pieces. And the vast majority of people who are playing 80 to 90% of the time are doing tasks that do not involve that. So the moment they hit that, which is really fast, they're gone. And they may the majority of people will not return because of your choice to dangle the carrot and never give the carrot. There's a reward to consistency, and then there's a reward for completion. They don't go hand in hand most of the time. they're pre-selecting for individuals who are agnostic to one. If you like someone who's very consistent, who plays consistently, like a live service game player, putting a big obstacle that takes many trial and error to do is not a live service. It's not a live service thing. You don't develop a habit by failing 99% of the time and then having that one completion and then dropping it and never doing it again. That's the completionist mindset. So when you design you gate your content behind hard dungeons and hard trials, you lose every live service game player that you recruit with your low resource strapped content that you roll out and extend across a long border. Those individuals aren't expecting that. They're expecting to go out for a jog every single day. And then one day they'll just get a little faster. They'll get a little stronger. They'll run a little longer. But they can do it every day. Put a gigantic obstacle and tell them, okay, well, you ran one day. That's good enough. Now get as fast enough to compete in a sprinting contest. They'll take the road. Or you get that one person that's like, yeah, I can do it. So then they train, they do the sprint thing, and then they never do it again. And that's kind of what Western MMORPGs used to be like. You do it, it's like, great, like, awesome. We got it, I got the loot, I'm done. Next big epic event. And then this game represents the intersection at that. On the one hand, you're making all your campaigns the structure of a live service game, but you make all the end, like the reward or the sentimental feeling of pride and reward, a completionist task. There are completionist task oriented towards consistent behavior, but you're looking for exceptional behavior. As opposed coordinated exceptional behavior, scheduled, planned, coordinated scheduled behavior versus I always just spin the wheel, kind of like eating. Does completing a trial and a dungeon or working towards a trial and a dungeon feel like eating because eating makes me feel good? No, it does not. In fact, it's like having 9 really crazy bad meals and in hopes to save up money for that one great meal. But most of your monetization and your poor lack of content rotation is loosely supported by the live service model. But most of that revenue ends up going into highlighting the great meal that most people are not going to touch. Like if you ask a lifestyle person, would you rather have 10 average meals or one great meal in a 10-month period, like in a 10-day period? Generally speaking, consistency would appeal to someone who wants overall consistency versus someone who want to go out with a bang. And that's kind of in my opinion, that's kind of the contrast between a live service person and a completionist type gamer. I mean, I'm no stranger to completionist type behavior, but those are my solo games. Like, or you play a multiplayer game, like a PvP game, sure. Like that is a way to consistently provide, I guess, that reward for being a skill related issue, right? But let's just say that used to also be the vision of this game a while ago, but that's not being it's clearly not being kept up to date. So which is it, I suppose? It's tough. I think that's one of the major questions that the next module will probably answer, or maybe attempt to answer. Maybe a more clear vision. I want to say I can fill in, you know, something interesting to say while I'm doing the 6th week, but it's not interesting. But what I mean is about the game. So, ironically, having these types of discussions, the stuff that I'm sharing about my observations and whatnot, that's what live service games do. It tells, you know, you shoot the discussions. You talk about like anything. Generally speaking, you're not talking about a set piece or something. You're doing something so that you can chill and hang out with peeps. It's not particularly engaging to those who are like elitists or have performance in mind, but it's an activity. It's a life activity. What do you do when you run with a friend? If you can, you would probably strike up a conversation about what they're doing over time. So that's kind of what this serves as. There's no... And the reason why I'm not running dungeons is because dungeons or trials of this content is because I don't do that. I'm a consistency person. I'm not going to sit there and organize something that has a big roller coaster ride, so a big payout, but also a big pitfall. If I sit here and grind with like 7 other people, if we don't succeed, that's a big pitfall. If we do succeed, it's a great accomplishment. And then what you do, you wait for the next big thing. You wait for the next big challenge. And for someone like myself, that's unrewarding. Like, I don't personally thrive on that, but if I wanted to, I'd just play a single player game. That's not dependent on something I can't control, because this environment, this game itself, this environment does not promote either or, where you're a casual player that can bridge into legacy completionism, or the other way around. The legacy people have no activity or interaction that allows them to remind themselves that they must require uninitiated players to be part of their community. So not only does this game end up not being welcoming when you're an experienced player most of the time, because you behave not like them, it creates segregation. So the biggest pool of players that would speak are new players, and the gatekeepers spend most of their time gatekeeping and staying behind their castle, so it's reasonable to be understanding to them that they don't usually spend time with inexperienced players, and when they do, it can be a very emotional event for both players. On the one hand, you might be able to recruit a casual player who admires an experienced player, maybe 1 out of 100. And then on the other hand, you might have one legacy person who likes to help out the uninitiated, maybe 1 out of 100. But generally speaking, when you spend too long designing a game that keeps the two groups segregated constantly, it is very reasonable to expect that they will have negativity towards each other all the time. And that's healthy if both groups understand that that is the case. So if someone, say, approaches me and asks me, what's the end game like? Like how do you find the end game satisfying? My answer is no, it's not satisfying. But it can be satisfying if you spend the time and commitment to coerce your, like, to basically ingratiate yourself into a privileged group. If you don't, I would probably highly recommend you pick up a different game, or maybe join in the founder's effect of a new game. So find a new game that can elicit this same structure, but join in the founder's effect and know that maybe their developer wants to stick with the founder's effect, because this community is gated. It's gated beyond belief. So the only recommendation that I could possibly make to 99% of the players, not the 1% that will stick around regardless because they seek to be elitists, which is a very admirable quality because it means they want to be good at something and commit to something. But the other 99%, play the game slowly, play for 3 months, determine if you're that 1% that wants to commit and take the plunge to being initiated into the 1%, or you don't and play another game. The 3 months is, honestly, in my opinion, 3 months well spent. Like, it'll entertain you for 3 months. It gives you maybe a learning lesson if you wanted it to, that kind of thing. Maybe even to help someone understand what an older MMO philosophy kind of looks like. You have to be part of a clique. The new age stuff, like the really successful, lucrative, successful, super popular live service games, they're not legacy games. They're not games predicated on privilege or performance. They're predicated on sharing and helping. So whether you like it or not, you're helping new players. In this game, even though this is random, like incentivizing this random, the community is so selectively biased already that they circumvent this need to do random queues. Because I don't even blame them for circumventing it. It's reasonable because the queues are trying to balance in uninitiated people and initiated people, but the content is made towards initiated people. So it is all the individuals who are at the mercy of the random queue are at the mercy of the benevolence of the legacy holders. So what do? I guess I could say I'm part of the 1%, but not part of the 1% that has all the gear, completed all the trials, all the dungeons. I'm the 1% that decided to choose to queue to this random, and I can tell you the experience is a gigantic miss most of the time. And it's generally, the most regular occurrence is there's going to be a toxic veteran player who happens like 50 to 60% of the time, or 2 or 3 people who do it for clout, and then the rest are uninitiated people who have trouble communicating, so they don't have a system that supports and aids them to not have to communicate, so they can't even ice break yet. And the easiest way to get around that is to keep fishing for a benevolent, experienced player group. So when something comes up, the first thing you note is, what is my rate of success? Oh, there's no way this can win. Drop the queue, fish for more. And then the vast majority of these groups are formed outside the system the game is made to encourage the mixing of experienced players and inexperienced players. In, like, to contrast, in PSO2 NGS, it doesn't matter. Everywhere you go, you're gonna be mixed in. They have alliances and stuff, and it's like alliances doesn't even matter. Like I've jumped between alliances and players just come and go. If you can't find someone, they even provide something for it. Like you can enter an empty instance and they're just 7 dummy targets, AI dummy targets that distract enemies for you while you're doing stuff. So they continue to find ways to make you feel like you have a accessibility to doing the stuff. But here, one of the first warning signs you have to remember to do is do not ask questions in PE, because there is going to be 60 to 70% of the time that snide, agnostic, unfeeling veteran player that dominates the conversation by saying you should learn how to read, go on YouTube and learn to read, get good. That's how I'm going to summarize it, because they actually say even nastier things than that. They say, like, it turns out to be less informed than that. It's like, oh, why are you bothering with that stupid stuff? Just do this. Like, that's what happens. It's a human condition. When you start knowing what to do and you do it a lot, you devalue everything else. So like it's crazy. Like I have zone chat disabled by default, and I cover up, it's on the bottom right, but the LFG is still great. Like it's nice that people still use that. Occasionally you'll have like some toxic spillover that someone wants everyone to know that someone's bad, and everyone else wants to know that who's the elitist and stuff. And even the biggest representatives of this community, I've already experienced toxicity from them. Like and when it comes to toxicity, it's not unjustified or it's not malicious either. It's unintentional a lot of times. You can't, I think it's unreasonable to expect people who play video games, who escape from their daily activities to play video games, to have to behave like they would in a public, like in a different setting, right? So I don't think I want to paint bad people and good people, but it's not something to ignore either. Like, you have to be aware what you're getting yourself into. So is this game welcoming to new players? It's not. And it's welcoming to new players. The developers have done a great job, in my opinion, making the game accessible to new players. The community is not welcoming to new players. Whether it's intentional or not, you could say, I'm really welcoming. Like, I could say, I'm really welcoming. But what you observe in the game would suggest overall this game is not welcoming. And it's not malicious, it's not personal, it's conditioned. When someone asks, hey, what should I do first? Like, I'm trying to complete this campaign, what should I do here? The first advice someone would say is like, that's not worth your time. Go do this, and then pray and pay someone to suck up to someone so that they can take you through like this. They take you through this because that's all that matters, you know, like that's all that matters. That's kind of the gist of it. In fact, it's a lot more specific. And most of the time it starts with putting down the person and making them feel stupid, uninformed, or underappreciated, only to flex how much the other person knows. because you mixed people who like this game for its live service features with an entire group that's selected for elitism because they are justified to be elitism. They put in all the time in the game to get all these things. They've got their position. They followed this game for a really long time. So most of those people probably feel like they deserve to be in that position. And I personally, that checks out for human conditioning. But your game is most popular now because you keep focusing on live service stuff. And pretty much 90% of those live service people have no room to sympathize or empathize with the gripes of overprivileged people. That's like kind of expecting a plumber to want to empathize with someone who lives in a $1 billion mansion most of their lives. It doesn't track. It would be very reasonable to understand that you must calmly and surely explain to the plumbers, like, yeah, our game has a lot of loud billionaires, but if you enjoyed this part, we hope to design something that caters to you without forcing you to interact with the people who don't care about you. That could be a choice, right? That could be a choice, which is kind of where they're going, in my opinion. They're not addressing the lack of a bridge between the privileged and the non-privileged. So they continue to split their resources, in my opinion, the features that are introduced with each module, to cater to those who are new to the game and those who aren't. And then they hope to segregate them. So you might as well follow through. Get rid of random queues. Go with queues that segregate the players. You could embrace it, and that would lead less friction. The biggest friction outside of your usual like complete campaigns and doing trials is this, where the two groups mix, but the game doesn't have, most of its features do not mix these players. So what happens is they don't expect to ever play with each other. And when you don't expect to play with each other out of not doing it mandatorily, it doesn't normalize the behavior. So the normal behavior is, if you want to do a dungeon, you get people who know how to do a dungeon. On day one of accessibility to like the reliquary, and on day one of the accessibility to Temple Master of Temple Spider, the first set of LFGs are, you must be experienced. Like the first day, day one. And what promotes this behavior even more is that you put this stuff up on a test server, and that test server is what the veteran gatekeepers that you're getting feedback from are using to only benefit when it goes live. So this content could be completely removed, and I would say the vast majority of your new players wouldn't even know it existed. In fact, they probably don't even know the test server existed. And if they go on a test server, what are they going to test? They can't test it. They have no, like... In fact, I think I would even argue, change your test servers to have all the tools available to everyone, and don't legacy any of their characters. Make it into an action-adventure game, basically. It's not... Take the RPG out of it. No legacy when you playtest something. Provide everyone with a stock, tank, healer, all the outfits, right? Like, provide them with the gear that you would intend to go in and test these things from the back. Make it a character selection. And then you normalize that, at least. You normalize it so that the player has to experience the same experience than any other player. as opposed to testing something with your gear, with your, I know when it goes live, your gear will be more relevant, but you're not normalizing the experience for everyone. You're creating two segregated groups, and you continue to grow two segregated groups. Your most loyal group that you cater to, right? The group, the developer and the publisher that caters to, they are killing any opportunity that casual players will ever stick around, or new players will ever stick around. It's the 1% with thick skin who likes to play a video game that reminds them that life sucks because there are people here first. I guess good for them. They have a lot of like motivation, self-esteem and whatnot. Stop making it into a live service game, in my opinion. Then it's misleading. You support a live service model by tearing down tyranny, in my opinion. Like, you stop segregating people. But that also means, though, that could be like a bottom line issue where you lose your loyal fan base, right? And then that's the rest of your fan base. So you would have to rebuild from scratch, which might not help with the leadership. Like the leadership's opinion about the current state of game and all that stuff. I kind of digressed a little harder than I thought. But I don't think it's a narrative that I haven't rehearsed over and over again. And it doesn't go without... It's not new. I don't think it's new. I think most people who played over a couple years have come to realize that. At least I feel like they've come to realize that. I mean, I play this game every day, so it's not like I don't like the game. I like the game quite a lot, especially that it helps like contrast my palette with other games that I play. I play a lot of games that are Asian dominated. This is probably the longest game that's Western influenced. Still like my Lord of the Rings, still like my Tolkien fantasies and whatnot. Watching a series called Skulls and Bones? Bones and Skulls. I keep forgetting which order it is. It's a Western fantasy. It's tough to get people to like fantasy when Western fantasy has this desire to constantly keep the good stuff to themselves and not branch out. However, that's a little bit in this context. D&D has had a boon lately, so it goes without saying. D&D has reached out quite a bit now, far more than it used to be, where it integrates like different catering to individual groups that don't typically resonate with the old school like philosophies and whatnot. But this game is pretty old hat. It's trying to break into live service in its own way. I don't think it's particularly, like, for myself personally, I don't think it's particularly healthy for the game at the moment. It's not sustainable. However, the leadership might be happy with the game's performance. I can't know because I have no privileged knowledge of it. So they could be happy with the direction the game is going. I'm comparing and contrasting with similarly live service games that are struggling with ups and downs, right? PSO2 NGS was struggling with ups and downs. Like, it's a really old game, because it has the legacy of PSO2 base, the base PSO2, and they had a huge recession because they had to change things up. And it's not very different from whenever Cryptic has to renovate its combat system or overhaul its stuff. It's gone through similar periods of refinement. Just that to contrast, over the periods that I've been playing both, one succeeded dramatically more than the other in terms of like my personal metrics of what its success is. Like from a player perspective, it feels like when I log in PSO2, I can play for myself and play with others, which is the intent of the, playing those games in the first place. But in this game, I'm playing for legacy. I like this game because of how long I've been playing the game. It pays out because it reminds me of things that I've done for a really long time. But if I want to get this experience, I mean, you can get it by playing a classic CRPG just as much. CRPG or action RPG. I don't talk to anyone 95% of the time. And the only conversation I have, generally speaking, that happens is when someone whispers me, it's like, oh, hey, thanks for, that was like, I don't know, a great run and whatnot. Someone whispers like, thanks for holding down the fort and whatnot. It's like, that's great. Awesome. It's a shame that that's like an uncommon thing as opposed to a common thing. There are actually, I think it's to the point where I would probably argue it's safe to assume, in my opinion, conservatively, that there are more veteran players at any one time than new players on now. Like, it's gone so low that at any one time, the vast majority of players are experienced players. What does that mean? Well, I guess what I'm suggesting is you still have the dialogue of who is experienced and who isn't when it's just two experienced players calling each other out, because that's the culture. That's the culture the game has. It's about who's right. It's very rarely is it like an understanding conversation. When things go well, nothing is said, and that doesn't keep casual players from playing. Like, that doesn't keep live service players from playing, because they don't. You can find a live service solo player, which is pretty much what I am now. I only just play everything solo. So if a dungeon comes by, whenever just my 2 cents, whenever they announce hype, like, here's the loot for the new trial, and here's the loot for the new dungeon. I'm going to be honest with you, 90% of the players that see that, if they're still playing, say, oh, look, all the things that I am gated from. That's the first thought. Like, how am I going to get that? You look, it's like, I'm not going to be able to get that. And the people who you think, in my opinion, are looking at those threads, they're not, because they already know. That's what's happening. It's not even interesting to look at those things, because the vast majority of players are not hyped about that stuff anymore. In fact, it actually works against the developers right now. Whenever a new dungeon a new dungeon shows up and they post an article about here's the new gear from the new thing, the first thought that the occasional person would check who's experienced is my gear going to be relevant after this dungeon? The gear that I already have, is it going to be phased out? It's not about, hey, oh man, that's exciting, like, oh, new gear. It's generally speaking, great, I spent X amount of time getting this gear and they're already rotating it out. And that happens because the roadmap is built like a live service model, but they continue to make rewards and obstacles and designs to support a non-live service friendly model. So every single time in my opinion, most of the time when a new article is posted, here's a new gear piece, like this is a new thing, these are some new stuff, most of the people will react, that's why do I even bother coming to the website? It always tells me things I can't have. And the people who may be interested in it, they're only going there to see and get disappointed that their gear is going to get phased out. Because you made the obstacle up so difficult, quote unquote, difficult enough to satisfy your elitist groups, and you phase things out to keep the live service philosophy strong, but because of that, it's getting phased out way too often to satisfy your elitist groups or keeping them pacified, and all the new casual people may visit the website once, find out that it's only of articles of services they won't commit to because there's no incentive to commit to them, and all the fun new things that you advertise are out of reach. There are some silver linings. There have been some like community building things like, hey, here's a photo contest and stuff, but here's the big catch. Photo contests are predicated on the availability and accessibility of making great photos, making great screenshots, having fashion items or things that are accessible. That still excommunicates everyone but your loyalist groups. And your loyalist gatekeepers have these resources, but the vast majority are uninterested in that. You've already conditioned them to look out for new gear. So when there's a post, that gear post is most likely going to attract the one or two people who are insecure about their power position. And they hope to keep on securing their power position. With all that said, maybe 800 people a day on Steam is enough for the leadership. If there is even 800 nowadays on a daily basis. 800 is still a lot of people in my opinion, but I don't know if the leadership is satisfied with those numbers. It's ironic because without I don't know what's happening with the leadership, but overall the leadership is portraying that air of old schoolness, and I mean, you're following through. If the leadership wants to remember what it's like this is my game, right? And if the leadership is like old hat and wants their game to be like that, then they achieved it. But the old games are not trendy. So hopefully it's communicated that way, where like, hey guys, we're not here to cater to the new the new models. We're here to give you that authentic, old school vibe, and we're sticking to it. Then I'm all for that. That's brave. As long as you're not debating people or deceptively recruiting people to an experience that they're deceptively being told, not like doing a live service model and then suddenly charging for microtransactions that have no incentives that promote a live service model, then what I call that is an angry mob. When you advertise what you intend to do and you execute on what you intend to do, that's great. It doesn't matter. Games don't have to be popular to have a beautifully wonderful, positive community. This community is not positive. It's not net positive. It's net negative. So there's some sort of dissonance somewhere between what people expect from the game and what the game is being offered. And I hope they find whatever that is. For myself, it's offering enough for me to play every day. It doesn't offer enough for me to say the game, all the game's design is accessible to me. Even for my sub, I don't feel it's accessible. And I'm not all that extraordinary, and I still don't find it accessible. I can't even reasonably find to tell someone like, hey, you know, if I can do it, you can do it. No, like, it's more like, if I got this far and still feel like there are some things gated, and someone asks, is this the game worth quote unquote worth investing in? The answer is no. Is it a game to play once and experience temporarily? Absolutely. You're not playing this game expecting to play for years on end. It would be a misleading thing. You would be doing it to mislead someone. Probably be like precautious, like cautiously optimistic. Like, you could be that one person who really, really loves this, but I warn you that statistically that's not true. So hopefully, in my opinion, I don't hope for people who ask and show enthusiasm for a game to not give it a try, at least. But I not want to discourage them to leave a game. You're trying to figure out a good class? What kind of class are you interested in? And what I mean by what kind of class, have you played a game like this before? Like in MMO, say like World of Warcraft or something? And if you have, like, do you have a role that you prefer? Something that strikes your fancy? Like, what do you imagine yourself doing more often? Well, what are you looking for? A new experience, an old experience kind of thing? I can tell you what you like. AoE damage? Ooh, okay. I can tell you that all the classes outside of maybe one statistically have wonderful AoE damage. So if you're talking about a burst AoE, right? Rogues are burst AoE for sure, and so are warlocks and wizards. They probably have a satisfying one click rotate, like a one rotation thing. If you like holding down a button, you know, like a persistent AoE, persistent AoEs would be probably just the barbarian. Fighters, wizards, locks, and rogues are rotational AoE. So you hit a sequence of buttons and you get that nice big number, right? Blade Masters are you hold it down and you do AoE damage over time. So if you like that satisfaction. There's also, if you're an AoE, if you're a damage dealer, if you're interested in damage dealer, there's also a really big distinction between being a range damage dealer and a melee damage dealer. So if you prefer to be, that's a really strong consideration. It's a very divisive part. So because melees they treat melee a lot different from AoE when it comes to design of stuff. In terms of range, right now wizards and warlocks are, in terms of how you input and like position yourself, they're very similar, but in terms of the AoE damage, they're the performers for AoE damage. What I can say for both is there is a big distinction in terms of how they feel. Warlocks sprint. They they have full sprinting, so they don't dash or dodge, and wizards do. So if you're into, that could be a separation in playstyle where you're if you're more of a one position to another position kind of person, like one, then rotate, one, and rotate. Or you like the control of holding down a shift button, like kind of like Call of Duty or something, where you hold down and you move with finer control. That's probably a big difference between them, like playstyle wise, like how they feel. But in terms of output and whatnot, they're within like statistical range of each other. There is one more choice for range damage, but in terms of AoE, it's not as flexible, which is the cleric. But it's a very grounded and limited range AoE thing. And wizards and warlocks perform like overall great with ST. So either or would strike your fancy. If you like something that's more I'm only describing the stuff that happens a lot, as opposed to like the theme and like what they do. All of that stuff is flavor, like their animation and stuff. You're gonna have to determine if you like how they look and how they walk and stuff. But in terms of play style, that thing that you're gonna constantly do, wizards dip and dodge all the time, so they TP short distances, they blink. And warlocks slip, so they're like more like they slip from A to B. Basically they sprint across the thing, and both of them have a rotation in terms of AoE, and they are preferred. Range DPS in terms of designs typically are preferred when it comes to performance, because a lot of bosses are designed with proximity. So if you like that type of gameplay, melees are really good. Like rogues are really good at damage dealing. But if you like sitting there pewing with numbers, it's a range AoE. In fact, a lot of times people prefer to have range AoEs in content because it's safer. Yeah. It's really engaging though. Like having a rogue is really engaging. It's just sometimes you kind of just want to pew for numbers, right? So it's really often a really different experience. I keep saying really, but it's a gigantic experience in this game between being a melee and being a ranged. And historically, bosses tend to be more flexible as a range person. I only fill the role of tanks and healers, so the only contrast I can tell you is tanks are like playing a rogue and a fighter, or a blade master or barbarian, And healing is kind of like positioning like wizards and warlocks, where it feels exponentially safer when you are just not near the target anymore. And this game is really biased towards that. It is exceptionally not stressful as a melee, and it could work for you though. Like, people like that. They like the stress of being a melee, but it is a very different experience. You're far more in danger most of the time. Hopefully that helps. And enjoy level 6 rogue, huh? That would put you might have finished Never Death. I don't know if you noticed, you probably did, that this game doesn't have a leveling system, or it doesn't have a traditional leveling system. It just, as long as you finish the adventures, you level. It would put you in like this area, Velosk or Never Death. Once you complete this whole thing, you just turn level 20. Like, you just max out once you complete the quest line. Yeah, Velosk. Okay. It's a nice, I like that map because of the whole Starry Moon like area with the werewolves. What am I doing? Missives. How'd you come, if I may ask, how'd you come across Neverwinter? Am I not getting... Neverwinter Nights, long time ago, yeah. Oh, interesting. Have you quickly discovered that it's not a CRPG? I mean, I do like, I know enough about Neverwinter Nights. I myself personally haven't played. Yeah, this is structured off of when this game was released, it was structured more like the early 2010s, where action combat MMOs were in favor. So like Terra Online and stuff were coming about. So this game is just a combat MMO, as opposed to your closer to CRPG kind of experience with a greater like Dungeons and Dragons universe, like you know, BioWare, classic BioWare stuff back in the day, or narrative driven, heavy lore related kind of experience. Yeah, Neverwinter here just serves as a backdrop, but if you're really into the Neverwinter mythos, you might get a lot of this fan service. I'm not very close with Neverwinter stuff or D&D stuff, but I do understand a lot of the popular things that people like when they see it. It's like, oh yeah, this is fan service, you know, like Dritz shows up, right? Dritz actually shows up a couple times. MAKU, I don't know how people go about it. Yeah, so you can pick up all the little things, so that might be something where it does happen a lot. So I like to ask about how you heard about it, because yeah, that stuff is really interesting for fan service. There's a lot of fan service in this game, I've been told. However, it is a big debate though, because I've had this conversation a bunch of times where people came in and it's like, wait a minute, Why does Neverwinter Nights look so different? It's like, this is Neverwinter Online. Yeah, so I'm always curious how people come across Neverwinter, and often it is because of Neverwinter Nights. However, the experience is shockingly different, and yeah, there's no. Oh, the Harvest Festival. That's a great example. I don't see. I'm not sure if it's close enough. So there are rotating events in this game, and some of them rotate with it. There is a, I'm gonna say there are one or two events that have the spirit of the Harvest Festival, but not like only in name, like only in theme that it's related. But you know, it's like since this is an MMO, it rotates seasonally, right? So it happens in a certain time of the year. And it's summertime, so or it's approaching summertime, so the next couple events would be the summer rotation stuff. So the newest event that's gonna start on Wednesday, which is a rotated event. They don't like make new events every year. It's a refinement of an older event every year, so you kind of get used to seeing them come up. So Day of the Dungeon is coming up this Thursday, and they restructured it to fit more of a live service game kind of thing. It's a celebration of the tabletop stuff, so you'll probably get some fan service here with Respin. So you go on to this virtual tabletop, which in a virtual game, and then you might pick up some fun little fan service. I can't tell you what they are because I haven't personally read a lot of books and whatnot, but you might find them interesting. And I don't think there's a level. These events tend to have no level cap or requirements. But yeah, this is a very chill game. Outside of the specific like dungeon stuff, you just chill. You just play. You can get to level 20 today if you want. That's kind of the thing. Play in moderation. I play I'm gonna say I play 20 minutes to 30 minutes a day. I go in, do a few dungeons, and then hop off. It's a live service game, just to keep you grounded. If you know what I mean by live service games. You do dailies, you do weeklies, and then the next, eventually every 3 or 4 months, something comes up. It may or may not interest you, but you'll still do it once, you know, once a day, once a week, something like that. And then hope that your favorite thing about Neverwinter shows up. For me, I like doing the live service routine, so I do it. The most I've known about Neverwinter actually comes from this game. I don't know that much in terms of the lore itself. Usually my backdrop is in science fiction and Eastern fantasy games, so I know a lot more about things like Final Fantasy and whatnot. But this is my daily driver, so to speak, for Western fantasy. I still watch like Tolkien and that, you know. There's you know, I still keep up with Lord of the Rings, right? I know I still find Lord of the Rings, new Lord of the Rings stuff entertaining, like Rings of Power and whatnot. But I'm a superficial dabbler. I'm not like super sweats. I can't tell you and recall a lot of things. Casually enjoying it. And the boon to D&D, by the way, like as a D&D lover, it's a golden age right now for D&D. Anything D&D related. So there's that. I would love to ask you, how do you feel knowing that D&D is as edgier as ever? How do you feel about that? Yeah, I played them all. Nice, nice. Did you get I mean, there's the new, I imagine you had an opportunity to play, like, a lot of the Lorien, groups games? Both. Oh, not the, like, not online as in, like, D&D online, but just, D&D, the, a bigger community in general, like D&D exposure. I guess there's that D&D live service thing, D&D Beyond thing that they launched, but I don't know too much about it to be able to say anything. What about Lorien games? Have you touched any of the Lorien games? Like Baldur's Gate 3? Divinity? I mean, it's loose, obviously, but it's in the same scape. Okay, okay. They're pretty big too. Those are the things I know. When it comes to people who might find this stuff interesting to also dabble in that stuff. I'm a Steam user, so I've had a copy of Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 for the longest time, but I haven't jumped into that. Or even any of the Pathfinder things, or any of the games that are written by Obsidian Entertainment, like Pillars of Eternity, Tyranny, a lot of the resurgence of the classic CRPG stuff, which is very similar, which is very where Neverwinter Nights and whatnot hailed from. Oh, I see. I have played Divinity. Oh, you have. Okay, okay. I see. Well, you're... Oh, that checks out. Yeah, I played this as a daily driver for like 7+ years now. But with all that said, this is my closest to understanding firsthand a lot of the Western stuff. Like Western fantasy gaming stuff. Pillars of Eternity 1 and accidentally bought Pillars of... Wait, you accidentally bought it on a different platform? Wait, how do you accidentally buy it? Is there a story behind that? Like the word accidentally. Oh, I see. Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, in terms of gaming, I follow the most of the stuff that I can talk about when it comes to D&D in general is the ones that are successful, popular, you know, like things like that, and the developers. I follow developers and writers a lot. So Obsidian Entertainment and Lorien would be, at the moment, the GOAT when it comes to digital games. Digital games of D&D assets. Lorien and Obsidian are like... It's hard to rival them at the moment. Like BioWare, I don't think is ever gonna come back to doing something D&D related. They're more crossed over to the sci-fi era now, where they just focus on sci-fi writing. Yeah, I would be really shocked. I mean, it's not impossible, right? It's just really, really highly improbable that BioWare will return back to their Western fantasy roots. Although, I guess with that said, BioWare still has Dragon Age, right? Isn't Dragon Age BioWare? There is that Dragon Age game that has been forever. Yeah, Absolution or something. Yeah, Absolution. That's still there. So that's probably their Western title that they're gonna continue to work on. I haven't personally played any of the Dragon Age stuff, but I have seen a lot of Dragon Age stuff. And another unrelated developer, Dragon's Dogma, is something that is tangentially constantly in the same conversation as Dragon Age. But it's a contrast, since Dragon's Dogma is an Eastern take on Western fantasy. It's one of the rare ones where people are aware of the game and they actually play the game, but they're more into Western fantasy. Often Eastern and Western fantasy tends to be quite different. Yeah, it's a different take. Eastern fantasy tends to be more character-driven action, as opposed to giving you more of the tabletop feel. Like, try to retain some of the tabletop feel. Japan and like a lot of Japan developers, their first idea is not restricted by needing to or influenced by needing to simulate some of the tabletop feel, which is the nostalgia point for selling games like Neverwinter and any of the Western fantasy stuff. You gotta retain some of that great tabletop feel that brings the extra sentimentalism in it. I play a lot of indie games, so most of the time all the indie games are actually tabletop inspired. Pretty much tons of the mini games. So my interest in Neverwinter and Dungeons and Dragons largely spawned from me being interested in board games, which are, under the big umbrella of tabletop games. But I myself have not played like a campaign or pen and paper tabletop stuff. Largely board game related. I can talk about a lot about board games, but yeah. This is the closest I have to... Oh, okay. This is the closest I have to the Dungeons and Dragons mythos. There's a Dungeons and Dragons movie, right? And I'm not sure if it came out yet. It's very soon. Pretty sure it's very soon, or it already came out. It's out? Did you see it? I haven't met anyone who I would ask if they've seen the Dungeons and Dragons movie. Not yet? Okay. See, here... and it's not for the... I don't want to give you the impression that I'm like writing it off already. You watched the original... Oh, interesting. So you're really deep into this. I'm asking you from the perspective of my first Western fantasy experience is World of Warcraft. Well, not World of Warcraft, the game, the world of Warcraft. Like, I was raised... My first Western fantasy was Warcraft OG, right? But it has a large legacy with Games Workshop, and then it owes a lot about Games Workshop, and legacy also, coincides with Dungeons and Dragons and Wizard of the Coast. So when I saw the movie, the Warcraft movie, there was a Warcraft movie, as a fan, I enjoyed it. As a person who have to objectively determine, or determine statistically how friendly it is to other people, right? Like to the greater masses, I can see why there was some divisive parts. But as a fan of Warcraft and a guilty pleasure for fantasy, like Western fantasy, it was quite enjoyable. I can understand how, and that's where I think, and to tie it back to the Dungeons and Dragons movie, that's how I feel about it right now. Like, what I would say is a reasonable outcome for the Dungeons and Dragons movie. It's hooray that for the fans think that Dungeons and Dragons is very popular, like it's popular enough, but then there's this reservation, like, is it going to become too mainstreamy, where then it draws criticism, and then also because it wasn't mainstreamy enough, it will draw criticism to individuals who compare it to, I don't know, a standalone Peter Jackson's production of Lord of the Rings or something like that. I don't know who has the streaming rights yet to the Dungeons and Dragons movie. It might be Netflix. But eventually I'll see it when it hits the streaming platform. Nowadays in the going outdoor, like going to movie theaters, everyone's working these days. Yeah, I what I mean is I don't think they announced who the streaming platform is going to be. A lot of times when a movie airs, while it's airing, it's going to say, like, they're going to announce, like, oh, these particular platforms will have the streaming rights 6 months later. Like, it's usually when it has to be completely removed from theater yet. But I don't know who is the... I plan my streaming subscriptions, like, gotta know when to have them and whatnot. So I think Netflix has a streaming deal with being the first people to host that. It could be HBO though. I could kind of see it as an HBO thing nowadays. HBO has a big investment at the moment in Western fantasy. Gotta hop on that Western fantasy train. Obviously the most notable Dungeons and Dragons or Western fantasy related thing that's happening on HBO is House of Dragons, because they have a working relationship with George R.R. Martin, right? So there's that's happening still. And then Amazon has the Tolkien estate, Amazon with Rings of Power, and then they recently struck a deal with GW, Games Workshop, for Warhammer, right? With the help of Henry Cavill and stuff. So Western fantasy everywhere. So it's a good time, in my opinion, unless you're like more of a hardcore person, you don't like your favorite toys being shared with the mainstream. I understand. It's fair. It's a good time to be a Dungeons and Dragons or a Western fantasy fan, because there's so much of it. Like in the next couple of years, that's all that is around the turning around the corner. Ironically though, the Eastern studios are going away from Western fantasy. They're going into sci-fi lately. So like cyberpunk and stuff, and mechs and all that are the new wave for the Eastern side of things. Even FromSoft has announced Armored Core, and Armored Core is coming out in August, even though they spent most of their time in dark Western fantasy for a while. Oh yeah, no worries. Is everything okay? Hopefully your headset's just out of batteries, right? When you say it's dead. I've been around a bunch of people, whenever they say their headphone is dead, they legit mean the headphone stopped working. Just out of juice? Okay, good. Excellent. I'll rewind a little. I was just reminiscing about it's a good time to be a Western fantasy fan, because like it unless you're like the guy who likes to keep the good stuff to themselves, I can understand that, you know, treasure. But Western fantasy is extremely mainstream online, like globally. Meanwhile, it's kind of funny because Eastern companies, like developers, people who make they do make Western inspired fantasy games recently, but they're kind of transitioning now to a cyberpunk, like to a sci-fi trend. So almost all the the bigger titles, like live service games and universes, they all have sci-fi spins now. The last one that's coming out that's Western fantasy is Final Fantasy 16, but that project started like 7 years ago. So Final Fantasy 16 is a Western fantasy inspired Eastern production, but they're like FromSoft is Armored Core, like they're kind of shifting again to sci-fi for a bit. So who knows? Maybe there's gonna be a BioWare sci-fi Eastern thing. I always wanted to try. You always wanted to try FF Online. Oh yeah, FF14. It's a commitment, but man, if there's a community that's at large, yeah, FF14 is a great one. If like expendable income and consistency is in your wheelhouse, you know, barring like real life, lots of life stuff, even family members interested, FF14 is pretty great. It's like the gold standard of Eastern MMOs. Oh, okay, EverQuest. You predate me. My first like big MMO is World of Warcraft. I started in vanilla, and I went to Burning Crusade, and then college happened, so I have to hang up the teenage years. EverQuest I've only seen at arm's length, and then EverQuest 2. What a different thing that happened with EverQuest 2, but I'm sure you probably followed that stuff, maybe at arm's length. But yeah, EverQuest 2 had some drama. I bounce a lot from MMO, but I think this one stayed with me for quite some time, because it's the only Western one that I've stuck with for a long time. I played a lot of Eastern MMOs, and Eastern fantasy just, I'm sure you probably dabbled in some Eastern fantasy. They're just not quite the same. And Final Fantasy 14, I would say, is the same reason. Like mechanically, the whole mechanical stuff overlaps. The mechanical stuff overlaps for sure. However, it's more about the theme, imagery, the lore. It's not for everyone. It's definitely not for everyone. So this conversation comes up a lot back in the day when Neverwinter Online was a bit more on the up and up. The dialogue about Final Fantasy 14 is often the imagery, the theme, and well, it's worth saying that Neverwinter Online is still, like, the people who remain are conservative old hat people. Like D&D has been a luxury tabletop thing that's very reminiscent of like Western culture's suburbia life culture, and that type of culture in the same context in Eastern culture is a little bit more different in representation. So like the themes, the body types, like the subject matters, and just basically the overall appeal is quite a bit different in Eastern fantasy. So often when I say it's great to distinguish between Eastern and Western fantasy, is the themes and the subject matters are just really often presented differently. But Final Fantasy 16 though is taking Western fantasy approach and then giving it the Asian, Eastern like combat system, which often you could say that for a lot of Western versus Eastern RPGs, but I think Final Fantasy 14 struck wonderfully in between. So it's still fairly reminiscent of early Final Fantasy days, but the reason why, one of the bigger reasons why it's a more accessible globally is how Squaresoft back then and Square Enix now is able to meld the tabletop like EverQuest, post-EverQuest, World of Warcraft feel and not go too far in. Neverwinter, I would say this game is even further closer to the Eastern-inspired combat system than the old school, like, Neverwinter Nights. Oh, no. Oh, you have it plugged in while using it. I see. No worries. I was just drawing contrast between Eastern and Western designs, but because you mentioned largely Western stuff, and Final Fantasy XIV is a great place in my opinion. It's one of the bridges between Eastern and Western MMO design. So whenever someone says like, you know, I play lots of MMORPGs and they're mostly Western style MMORPGs, what would be an MMO that would be a great like primer or transition to Eastern MMORPGs, like Korean ones and Japanese ones? It would be Final Fantasy XIV, because Final Fantasy back in the day had a long legacy of trying to, its appeal came from that it's closer to the tabletop experience, and by happenstance that is more appealing to a Western audience, and Final Fantasy XIV still captures that, the World of Warcraft-esque, EverQuest-esque type of older school nostalgia. And Square Enix have been popular ever since because of that. Way back in the day, Squaresoft Final Fantasy games got localized and became the de facto JRPG representation. Is because it shares the most common qualities with Western tabletop than any others. Meanwhile, their mainstay games are going way Eastern. They're all combat heavy, like Neverwinter Online. Neverwinter Online is closer to that than Final Fantasy XIV is, which is interesting observation that's worth mentioning. But yeah, Final Fantasy XIV would be a great way to see if you like Eastern fantasy without playing like completely like an Eastern fantasy game. Nowadays, Eastern fantasy is like Genshin Impact, and they're all combat oriented, character driven, combat oriented. Not that Genshin is an MMO, but it uses a structure like Genshin Impact. One MMO that I play that's free to play, if you're that is a combat MMO, is Phantasy Star Online 2 New Genesis, which is published and developed by Sega. So that will get you your foot in the doors to understanding like what it is to be a Eastern MMORPG. They tend to be incredibly combat oriented. If it's turn-based, or tab-based targeting, it tends to be what was inspired off of Square Enix, so Final Fantasy oriented stuff, which there are some nowadays who are revisiting the turn-based systems. That was a big digression, but I like talking about game theory. Oh yeah, no worries. Take care. I hope you get your headset charged. Thanks for hanging out, and enjoy Neverwinter. Let me know if you encounter something great. I'd love to hear your experiences with it. I keep forgetting what I'm doing. Oh, right. I need to do these summoners so I can hop off. Summoners. Summoner. There's one. Just quickly switch instances, get the last summoner. All right, I think we're done for today. Right? Did I? Yeah. All right. So let's plop this guy back in PE. When I stop clicking on the wrong thing. Okay. Pop this guy back in PE, and then we switch. Open 7 loot boxes just because we can. Probably, hopefully to roll average, I guess. Maybe we'll be above average this week. Kind of fun opening 7 at a time. Alright. Let me get rid of this. Alright, here we go. Actually, should have a bag left. Okay. 7 keys? 7 keys. Alright, here we go. That's below average. Really, really far below average. That's below average. Below average. Below average. Really below average. Below average. Below average. Okay, so basically 7 keys below average. Sounds about right. Let's switch. We'll do our random queues too, so I don't forget before I switch for the day. All right. We'll stand here for like a couple minutes, see if we find a group. Unless these okay. This turned healer, so let's just do here. I mean, we could tank for this group. Okay, never mind. We got the solo queue. Solo queue is the way. This command right here, it says your party is waiting for you. That means this is a failed instance. So this instance is probably either the Reliquary or Tiamat. For whatever reason. Reliquary or Tiamat. Let's find out. It's a Reliquary. And they're missing members. There you go. My digression from earlier. That's typical experience. And waiting there is takes longer than not attend to reform. So let's try again. Whenever the roll bonus shows up, it means there's a chance that the only role required to fill is that role. And I do that just out of how long I have to wait. And then I'm looking at LFG. Alright, we have someone. Let's see. They said any. Okay. They were missing one of each. Alright. Nope. I don't have any plans on doing the new trial unless something happens, but I have not. I just queue random to do the dailies. Do I do anything endgame? No, not really. I mean, this is the endgame, but I think what you mean is, do I do Master Temple of the Spider or the Reliquary? I could probably defer you to someone who might be doing it. New player. Not new player. Just an alt. New player. Kinda nice being new players. That bard is an alt. Who is it? Who's the offender? Oh wait, we can't tell. Do I know this player? I think I... No, I don't. That res sickness though. That rogue with the res sickness. Slipper. Eh. Rip. The face tank than the casual LFG group. No one picking them up, waiting for the healer to pick them up, and then someone else dies. Yeah, classic behavior. Can't actually target that guy, and the guy's right on top of each other. Why do they insist on standing on top of each other? Well, at least we know these guys aren't experienced players. Yikes. Who can even go in there? Is no one gonna grab that dude? Yeah, I'm not walking in there. I end up dying. Everyone's just standing in front of the dragon. Huh. Whatever works. Thank goodness it's not master. Definitely don't miss those days. Everyone do be dead now. It's okay, we only need like 2 of the people to live. So, just 1 of the tanks are enough. Not the one that constantly smites over and over again. And still has a Charge Avenger up. That's one of the feats. And then this guy who like is lagging out like crazy somehow. stacked on each other. Like, man, imagine voluntarily taking damage over and over again. Even at this threshold. Ooh, okay. For sure. Wow. Is that the 80k dude that can't bother be moving? Yeah. I mean, you don't have to play Masters to know that you're being toxic. Yep. Yeah, definitely. That's the guy. Doesn't help that he has a thick dragonborn to top off the ego. How I would describe this is more like going to a gym and seeing someone ego lift. Not maliciously. I don't think the person's being malicious, just complacency has its place. When you get too used to cutting corners, you don't typically end up going back to routine if your routine is to cut corners. Those guys just swap willy-nilly, man. Feels bad, man. Here's a deep cut that I haven't really talked about for too long. When something's easy, people stick with sufficient. As opposed to when something is easy, it's an opportunity to refine. That's a mentality. Being sufficient. Sufficient does promote efficiency, but it sacrifices potential and incremental improvements. Something very, very difficult to appreciate for someone who aims to complete and be a specialist. Is hard to appreciate the process when you're so focused on the end result. Pretty much 80 to 90% of the experienced players who randomly queue for rough AD is fits into that type of archetype that I'm talking about. Natural part of the human condition, but you know, complacency breeds underperformance. It's not a lifestyle, it's a accomplishment. Consistent underperformance by using crutches. All right. Last run for the day. Take care of our dailies. More interesting just to observe people's behavior. Wow, that guy rather just pop a potion than shift. That's new. Divine Champion Anchor. Oh, nope. That person's definitely new to this. Good thing I stood here. Wonderful. Now we go help out our chunky divine champion user, who uses the utmost. Man, that's no love right there. Using that artifact. Oh man, there must be some goat influencer somewhere who thinks he's like endgame elitist, offering that advice over and over again. They're not talking about the diminished return on overlapping shields, because man, I see that so often, that artifact being used. Are there just not any more Oath Keepers anymore? Is that why people do that? Or are Oath Keepers so deficient at using Hand of Divinity that makes tanks use that trinket? I don't think I've gone through a day in a solo queue without a tank using the gong artifact. Someone's around here telling every tank to run that. Gotta be it. It's such a high coincidence of all the choices. Initiate with that. I even forgot what it's called now. Valve of enmity, yeah. Initiate with valve of enmity. Classic. Kind of nice. I mean, the Arbiter just chooses to use Hallowed Ground most of the time. Kind of interesting approach. Quite a team-oriented play that you don't see too often. I mean, I suppose you would get used to it if you're constantly face tanking. that delay hit on the pot. Healed like 5% of his HP after I hit him. After I healed the target. Healed for 5%. Don't blame them though. Usually, when you random queue like this, the healer would largely be AFK most of the time. Gotta fend for yourself. Hey, worm. Almost time. We're at the end. Ugh. Wow. Just stand in there, dude. Melee range attacker. Dang. Constantly standing next to the tank. It's the person's reaction. I'm gonna chalk it up to like ping probably. That looked like it was 300 milliseconds off. The person is constantly dodging after getting hit, but it's not out of panic. It's like a really fixed interval that they're late. Definitely a ping thing. That isn't though. Going to melee and hollow grounding right next to a boss. They probably like to secure the binding light attack. I forgot what it's called, but radiant blast. I don't know what it's called anymore. But standing in melee just means more like not wanting to aim. But it's just one stationary target still. Instead, just taking it to the face. And then standing right on top of the tank, so I can't solo heal the person that's injured. That guy's using Mightier Leap though. That gets bonus points, bonus brownie points from me. That's a Blade Master that uses Mightier Leap. Loses bonus points. This tank loses bonus points for using that trinket. And that Blade Master loses points for relying on Not So Fast reset for a single target. What else can I pick out? The lock is pretty traditional, so nothing out of the ordinary. It's not like a random melee lock or something. The Arbiter is using the same rotations too, with Conflagrate and whatnot. Or not, Prophecy of Doom or something. It's the thing that has a really long animation. I think it's Conflag, yeah. Yeah, the tank basically negated my like the tank negated 70% of my mitigation just by using that trinket. But like just because they can. It's kind of like if you were asked, would you pay for the same steak Like you go to a fancy diner, right? And then they offer you a steak. And the steak is the same for both. But one you pay $1,000 for, and the other you pay $100 for. And because your company feels guilty for paying $100 because it's too cheap, they would rather pay $1,000 for the steak instead. That's kind of what's happening here. So instead of taking my 200% shield, they decide to use a trinket that basically deals half their HP, their maximum HP to themselves automatically over and over again. Because they just want to. It does not aid in any reflective damage whatsoever. Skill issue on that regards, but just deliberately using a trinket to negate 50%. That's just it. Classic stuff. All right. That concludes our week 6, which was like basically the same thing since week 3, right? Week 4. Week 4, this 6 is essentially the same, where week 4 introduced a stopover event, which is non-repeatable for the next 2 weeks. So that's about it. Overall, can't say anything. It's average. So since nothing really matriculated and I stick by my live service evaluation, it's a 4 out of 10. Not really bad, but also below average, but around average. It's average, but it's not enough to meet a standardized minimum bare bones bottom line live service rotation. But this is a carryover. I'm keeping my critique consistent with the carryover of the first module, which is this is a 2-module package. So it's the end of the block. Hopefully the design choice changes with a sudden shift in like leadership or something, but we'll see. Experience is the same, and then we're gonna switch gears. 4 out of 10.